If you've been exposed to the Puyo Puyo games at all, chances are you've probably come across the term GTR, but what does it actually mean? Well, GTR stands for Great Tanaka Rensa, or Great Tanaka Chain if you translate it from Japanese. Okay, what does that mean? Well, GTR is a popular chaining formation that around 85% of all Puyo Puyo players use, and a lot of the player base that do use it solely rely on the form. Considering the multitude of other chaining forms available, that's a ton of the player base constantly spamming the same form over and over again with little variety. It was originally founded and named after the Japanese player Tanaka, who, throughout all of my research, I could not find a single thing about them other than that they were a first-generation Puyo Puyo player that won numerous competitions. If anyone watching has got more info on the guy, please let me know. The build itself is actually nothing too complicated. You have this group of 3 Puyos in the shape of an L, with the back of it next to the wall on the board. And that group of Puyos is surrounded by a shell of Puyos of another color, except for the very top. The idea is that you pop the group of Puyos on the inside, and the outer shell will cascade on itself, and BAM! You now have a 2-chain. This form's main utility is to be used as a transition, or what the in-game tutorial calls a turnaround. To briefly explain, generally the most efficient way to build chains in Puyo Puyo is to build horizontally across the board, but eventually you run out of space when you reach the wall. To solve this problem, you build another horizontal chain on top of the already existing horizontal chain called floors, but to connect these together, you would need a group of Puyos to link them together, which would be your turnaround. To show you what I mean, let's use this stairs chain as an example. If we set off this group of blues here, we get a 5-chain until we hit this wall. This part of our chain is a floor. However, the chain doesn't end here, as this red pops the other reds underneath it, and because that there's a green on top, it sets off the rest of the chain on the floor underneath. This sequence right here is the transition of our chain, and is what enabled the 2 separate floors to be linked with each other, allowing for a huge chain. Now that we have a basic understanding of how transitions work, why is GTR out of all transitions so popular? Well, GTR is a mix of everything that makes a transition good. If built properly, it is extremely stable and very unlikely to cut your chain. It's also one of the most versatile transitions to build the rest of your chain off of, and it requires less vertical space than others since it's a more horizontal build, and it is generally a flat build, which in most cases allows the player to build very quickly since it avoids situations where you'd otherwise have to split your Puyos over a height difference, losing a little bit of time. So it's basically everything you'd want from a good transition. In fact, the transition is so strong that instead of players trying to build chains and just naturally incorporating GTR alongside other transitions into their builds, players rather rethink how to build around GTR in order to take advantage of the form's strengths. So, alright. Nearly everybody uses GTR, and you'd be hard pressed to find a match where GTR isn't used, and it just has a lot of utility as a transition. No wonder every up-and-coming Puyo player wants to learn GTR. So, how do we build it for ourselves? Well, on top of everything, the GTR itself is relatively simple to build, so much so that a flowchart can be followed to build a GTR consistently for almost every possible opening selection of pieces. The only exception to this is if our first 2 pieces are either all the same color, in which case you'd rather just clear them instantly to get the all clear bonus, or if those pieces were all different colors. However, this scenario actually can't happen, since the game is specifically programmed to only give you 3 colors in the first 2 pieces. This means that you are guaranteed to get at least 2 of the same colored Puyos within your first 2 pieces, which can be used to fill the bottom of the outer shell of the GTR. So knowing this, let's try to build one for ourselves, shall we? First of all, we need to build a solid foundation for our chain. We can see that we have 2 reds, so let's place them in the bottom left corner. Already from just placing these 2 pieces, we already have all the information we need to complete the GTR. The reds here act as the shell of the GTR, and since we had an excess green and a blue, we can place one of these colors on the top of the reds and the other right next to them. In this case, I placed the green on top of the reds, and the blue was placed to the side so the rest of the GTR can be built. The green here is going to act as the inside of the GTR. So now, all we have to do is make an L shape of 3 greens, and then surround that L shape with red Puyos aside from the very top. So knowing that, let's try to build the rest of the GTR with our upcoming pieces. We have a red coming up that is paired with a blue, so we can place this on top of the already existing blue. Next, we have a green-yellow, which can only be placed on the first column on top of the green we already have. This does block the top of the GTR, but it works just as well as we can use the yellows later to extend our chain further. Now, we have a green-red to finish up the inside of the shell of the GTR, and with that, our GTR is complete! All we need to do now is set it off to place a green on top of the yellows and pop the yellows. That wasn't so bad, wasn't it? Well, the thing is, what we've just done is built a 2-chain if we take away the excess yellows. And if we set it off like it is now, it won't do much substantial damage to an opponent's board in an actual match. I wouldn't really consider GTR as a full chaining form necessarily. It's not exactly a repeatable pattern as much as stairs or sandwich, though it can be built into your chain in some niche circumstances. Rather, it's a base to build the rest of your chain off of, and this is where GTR can get kinda tricky. How do we follow up this pattern to extend it? Well, I can't really answer that because of Puyo's RNG. The pieces and the colors that you get are random, and there probably won't be a single consistent pattern to follow your GTR at least cleanly. The most I can really say that might help is to base your extension off of the excess Puyos you might use to construct your GTR. For instance, using the GTR we made earlier, if we take a look at our next pieces, we have 2 blue-reds incoming. Since our 2 excess Puyos in column 3 are both blues, we can place our next blues in a white-shaped joint to extend our chain. There are simply a ton of ways you can extend your chain after the initial shape of the GTR. You can follow it up with a 2-2 stairs pattern, or a sandwich, or an L shape, or the aforementioned Y joint, or what about an extended version of that? Oh, and how are you going to go about incorporating tails into all of those variations? At that point, you pretty much need a basic fundamental understanding of how chains work, rather than following a simple pattern. This is something that even the official Sega tutorials don't really explain all too well, if at all. GTR as a form is very flexible, but that flexibility also makes building the chain that much more complex. I'm not even talking about chaining past the first floor from the initial transition, and accommodating for any potential color conflicts. This is just talking about chaining on the first floor. There are several traps as well that can result in your chain cutting prematurely. This follow-up is particularly infamous as you're not able to reach the GTR itself without cutting your follow-up afterwards. Of course, there are ways to accommodate these scenarios, but it just adds to the complexity of building a chain with a GTR as a base. It isn't as simple as just building the base and everything else comes easily when you want to build a huge chain. It takes knowledge of potential follow-ups, how to use them, and when in order to make a substantial chain, maybe even tailing them at the end if you want to extend even further. I find that a lot of newcomers that want to get into Puyo often try to jump headfirst into learning GTR before anything, which I wouldn't say is the best idea. Going for the form that has the potential to make mostly varied and creative chains without actually knowing how to make those chains in the first place is a bit of a recipe for disaster. You're unlikely to make any good progress as a Puyo player if you only just learn the base of GTR and nothing else. Instead, you can try to learn forms that are more structured and are easier to comprehend at first, such as stairs or sandwich. Or you could even try to freestyle your own chains without referencing a specific form until the concept of making chains fully clicks for you. Once you do learn how to apply those fundamentals, you can apply them to GTR to get some pretty clean chains. Just be aware that GTR won't do all the work for you. The last thing I really want to talk about is GTR's inherent popularity. If almost every Puyo player is a user of GTR, does that mean it's overpowered or that there's very little self-expression that goes into building chains? I honestly wouldn't say that for either of these things. Yes, it's popular, there are good reasons to use it, and there are players that use nothing but GTR, but at the end of the day, it's just another form to construct your chain with. If you make efficient use of space and place your Puyos optimally, any form can be just as strong as any other. And even if you have a GTR mirror match, 2 different players will likely have vastly different styles building their extensions to GTR and following it up. There's so much to Puyo that goes beyond just do this form and you'll win. It's such a complex game behind its simple and easy to understand base mechanics and rules. When it comes to building your own chains, just do what you want and whatever feels comfortable for you. whether it involves stairs, GTR, or even forgoing traditional forms entirely and just trying to come up with whatever random builds you can conjure up. Just know that if you do plan on using GTR, just remember it's a small part of a larger puzzle. And there you have it! Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on GTR. Do you use it at all? Or are you planning to learn it? Or did you know nothing about Puyo anyways and still stuck around to the end here? In which case, thanks! With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one, so see you guys!